Hey there, welcome to the channel. If you love stories packed with unexpected twists, justice served, and powerful moments, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to support the channel and never miss an epic story. Let's dive in. The night was heavy with rain, Heathrow Airport glowing under neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet urgency as travelers moved through security, their faces weary from long journeys. Among them was Alexander Carter, a man whose name alone could shake the tech industry. CEO of Aegis Technologies, a corporation pioneering AI and cybersecurity, he had no need for ostentatious displays of wealth. His power was not worn, it was understood. As he approached the first-class check-in, the energy shifted. Kevin Price, a young airline employee, leaned against the counter with a smirk, scanning Alexander lazily before tilting his head. "Sir, this is the priority line," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. His eyes flicked over Alexander's attire, an expensive, yet understated suit, then to the boarding pass in his hand. A flicker of something darker crossed Kevin's face, as if he relished this moment. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he added, holding the ticket between his fingers like it was counterfeit. Alexander remained still, his expression unreadable. A few passengers turned, sensing tension in the air. The first whispers began. "Maybe he's trying to cut in. Some people just don't belong here." Kevin tapped the keyboard, slowly, deliberately stalling. He had no idea who he was provoking. But soon, he would learn. Alexander Carter did not react. His face remained calm, his posture unmoving. He had encountered men like Kevin Price before, small men who mistook proximity to power for actual authority. Kevin, emboldened by the whispers around him, leaned further into his performance. He mused, dragging out the moment. "Looks like there's an issue with your ticket. Might be a system error. Or something else." His fingers hovered over the keyboard, barely pressing the keys. He wasn't checking anything, he was stalling, enjoying the attention. Alexander exhaled quietly, a measured breath. The game was transparent. Kevin wasn't interested in verification, he was interested in control. The passengers around them shifted, eager for the unfolding spectacle. A businessman behind Alexander sighed impatiently. "Just check his ticket or let him move on." Kevin shot the man a quick, dismissive glance before turning back to Alexander, his smirk growing. "Well, we have protocols for situations like this," he said loudly, ensuring nearby travelers could hear. "Security checks. You understand, of course." A few people murmured in agreement. Alexander caught a woman in heels shaking her head, whispering to her companion. "Some people always try to cheat the system." Alexander's grip tightened slightly on his suitcase. He had seen this play out before. But Kevin was making a mistake, he assumed Alexander was just another powerless traveler. With no emotion, no urgency, Alexander reached into his pocket and made a call. One sentence. "It's time." Kevin Price's smirk faltered the moment the call ended. The change was subtle, just a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but Alexander saw it. The air around them grew heavier, thick with anticipation. The overhead screens flickered for a split second, the lights above dimming just slightly before returning to normal. Then, they arrived. 3 men in sharp, tailored suits moved through the terminal with purpose. They didn't hesitate, didn't scan the crowd, they walked straight toward Alexander. The tallest of them, Richard Evans, chairman of the airline, was in front. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held the weight of absolute authority. Kevin straightened, swallowing hard as he instinctively stepped back from the counter. Sir, Richard didn't even glance at him. Instead, he stopped directly in front of Alexander and bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Carter, we sincerely apologize for this inconvenience." His voice carried, cutting through the murmurs in the terminal. Silence fell. The passengers who had whispered just minutes ago now stood frozen, their assumptions shattering in real time. The businessman behind Alexander shifted uncomfortably. The woman who had muttered about cheating the system looked anywhere but at him. Kevin, now visibly sweating, stammered, he never said who he was. Richard turned his gaze toward him, and in a tone that could freeze steel, he said, "You should have known." Kevin Price's world was unraveling. His once confident smirk had dissolved into pale disbelief as reality crashed down on him. His fingers twitched at his sides, searching for an escape that did not exist. The authority he had wielded so carelessly minutes ago now felt like a joke, a pathetic illusion shattered in an instant. Alexander Carter remained motionless, his gaze unwavering as Richard Evans turned to face Kevin directly. The tension in the air was suffocating. Passengers who had once whispered in amusement now stood stiff, watching the execution unfold in real time. "Step away from the counter," Richard commanded, his voice sharp and absolute. Kevin hesitated, his lips parting as if to protest, but before a single excuse could form, the second man, a broad-shouldered executive with an expression carved from stone, spoke. "You're done." The words landed like a hammer. Kevin stumbled back, panic flickering across his face. He turned to his manager, Greg Bradley, silently pleading for intervention. But Greg had gone ghostly pale, his own hands shaking. He understood what was happening even before it was spoken. Alexander finally moved, his voice smooth but edged with finality. "How many others have you humiliated like this?" Kevin swallowed hard, but no words came. Richard sighed. "Security. Escort him out." 2 guards stepped forward. Kevin gasped, but no one stepped in to save him. Because no one cared. Kevin Price's pleas barely left his lips before the security guard seized his arms. The once smug gatekeeper of the first-class counter was now nothing more than a trembling wreck, dragged through the terminal as passengers watched in stunned silence. Just minutes ago, he had relished his power, basking in the whispers of judgment and condescension. Now, those same voices carried nothing but hushed disbelief. Greg Bradley, the manager who had stood idly by, took a hesitant step forward, desperate to salvage his own position. "Mr. Carter," he stammered, his voice thin with fear. "This was just a misunderstanding." Alexander turned his gaze toward him, unreadable, unshaken. "No," he said smoothly. "It wasn't." The words landed like a final nail in the coffin. Richard Evans didn't even wait for further justification. Effective immediately, he declared, his voice echoing through the terminal, "You're suspended pending full review." Greg's mouth opened, then closed. He knew there was no arguing. His fate had been decided the moment he had chosen silence over integrity. Alexander exhaled slowly, the storm now passed. The lesson had been taught, the power had been balanced. Without another word, he adjusted his cufflinks, picked up his suitcase, and walked toward the private boarding gate, leaving behind nothing but the chilling weight of consequences. And as he disappeared into the first-class lounge, one thought lingered among those who had witnessed it all. They had underestimated the wrong man. As Alexander Carter disappeared beyond the private boarding gate, the echoes of what had just unfolded lingered in the terminal like an unshakable presence. The passengers who had once whispered in quiet amusement now stood in uneasy silence, the weight of their own assumptions pressing down on them. Some shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet each other's eyes. Others cast cautious glances toward the now empty check-in counter, where Kevin Price had once stood so arrogantly. A woman in a navy blue pantsuit, one of the many who had chosen silence over intervention, finally exhaled. "I should have said something," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. But it was too late. Greg Bradley remained frozen in place, his face void of color as he realized the full extent of his mistake. There would be no recovering from this. No excuses, no damage control. The moment he had let Kevin's abuse of power slide, he had signed his own fate. He swallowed hard, eyes darting toward Richard Evans, but the airline chairman had already turned his back. The lesson was clear. Power wasn't about titles or uniforms. It wasn't about who stood behind a counter or who held a clipboard. Real power didn't need to demand attention, it simply was. And those who mistook arrogance for authority would always, inevitably, fall. And so, as the last trace of Alexander Carter vanished into the luxury of first class, the message he left behind was undeniable. Some mistakes can't be undone. Some lines should never be crossed.